episode of Hidden Stories Healed Now. I want you to know that today is going to be an episode that I hope will help the community in which we live in, where we experience lots of trauma. Every day you turn on the news, there's gun violence, there's something that's happened, there's something that's going on. And sometimes we don't recognize when it happens within a family. What do you do? How do you move forward? Today is special to me because I have a very good friend with me today. And I remember the moments of her story that she's going to share. And I hope that you're tuning in, ready to listen. And what I want you to really focus on is the tips and the things that she gives you in terms of how do we move forward. Will you please join me in welcoming Mrs. Darlene Quincy to the show?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I am so happy that you're here. And girlfriend, you look good.
Thank you.
You know, we haven't been able to see each other or hug each other, but it's really good to see you today.
Thank you.
So I would love for you to share with our audience your story.
Okay. Me and my husband, David Quincy, were married for 14 years. And prior to that, my sister, who I'm originally from Fort Worth, Texas, and of course I've lived here in Atlanta for the last 23 years. And my sister was going through a healing, we call it healing from cancer. And so we never speak the doubt, we call those things that be not as though they were. And so she was recovering, and during that process of her treatment, I just felt like, you know what, let me take your son, Mustafa, and raise him for you. It wasn't something that me and my husband, we had two small children. At the time, they were 6 and 7. And actually, they were younger than that. They were, I believe, 3 and 4. And so we decided to bring Mustafa into our house. He was 12 at the time. And we noticed that there were some very strange, different things about him. One of the other segments that you had on, Dr. Tanisha Parker, talked about wellness and mental health, right? And so, but we try to ignore those signs because we don't want that to be my child, my family member. And, but as he came and lived with us, we started getting him back up to speed with school. And, he didn't, want to follow instructions, but there were 2 parents in the home, our home. And so he had to follow the instructions that we had laid out for him. And I could just remember, even though we cared a lot for him, we treated him just like he was our child. It was different having another child, even though it was my sister's son, in our home. And so just, as years, maybe it was a year that he lived with us. But I could tell that, like, behind our back, he would go and talk to my sister. And at the time, Skype was really popular. I think it was Skype. Skype was really popular. And so he would, do FaceTimes with his mom and the Skype and all of that. And so, but he was telling her things that he thought we were doing, not doing, that made him feel a certain kind of way, almost like manipulating her to believe that things were happening that weren't happening. So at any event, he goes back home. And I really begged her. I said, Jackie, you need to recover. You need to heal. He's fine like he is. His grades are really great. He's making A's and B's. And so she was like, no, I'm going to have him to come back. I said, okay. And one of the things that I know that she struggled with was we discipline our children. Not every parent is going to do it the way we did it, right? And so, but he was one of those children that really needed a firm hand, firm conversation. We treated him just like we treated our children. But anyway, he goes back to Texas and lives. And then my sister passes away from cancer. Heartbreaking, right? And so my mom struggled with, where does this child now, not only did he lose his mom from cancer, but his father, a few years prior to that, passed away from prostate cancer. So now he's now 17 and in Texas with his, my sister's former spouse, but he feels disconnected. There was a struggle mentally, I could tell, that was happening with him. And so My mom decided, she made a decision after he told her, well, I don't really want to be here. And the same thing he was doing with us, that manipulation conversation where he was telling her, well, I really don't want to live here in Texas, and my stepdad is not, feeding me properly. And so it just became a really very strange dynamic. But the one thing I remember telling my mom is I said, when he lived with us, he's a handful. And so you're an older parent, you're single, and yes, he could come live with you, but you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. So let us help you with that. And so, but anyway, he moves to Atlanta I didn't want him to live with her. So he moves here. And then my husband, based on what my mom would say, is that he was not really easy to live with, right? Now he begins to demonstrate signs of what we knew existed, which was being manipulative. And she started saying that she felt like he was putting things like down in the kitchen, like sand or like sugar or something to make her fall, to do different things, like, just sort of psychotic things. And so I told my husband about that. And so he said, you know what? I got it. I'm going to go over there and have a conversation with him. And my husband used to be a high school math teacher at one of the local schools here in Atlanta. So he was very, a strong male presence. And I know my nephew didn't like that. And I know that he was intimidated by my husband because he also was kind of like a bodybuilder looking guy. And so one day he goes over to check on my mom because I said, this is it. I don't know. I'm not comfortable with him living with my mom. Now she's locking her door at night. Now he's coming home with black clothes on, with hoodies on his head, and it's 100 degrees outside. And so he goes over one night and he's checking on my mom, and he's in the back room. And of course, my mom has always got something, a to-do list for David to work on. He starts working on her laptop. He's trying to get her cameras in her house working. And so as he's in the back room, he comes probably, I'm making part of this story up because then that's just when tragedy begins. He goes through the house and then he's coming back. He's probably had a conversation with my nephew. And my mom said that she heard some scuffling in the house. She didn't know what it was. But she goes in the hallway leading back towards her entertainment room. And Mustafa is on top of my husband and he's stabbing him. And he's on top of him. So, one of the things that happens when someone is mentally deranged, the devil has a way with being taking over their body and can make them do things that they didn't even know they could do. Mm-hmm. And David was, I used to tell him, I'd say, you need to pay attention to him, because I would be in the car with him and I could see him, out of the corner of my eye, and I would always pay attention. And David was like, no.
So we're going to take a station break, and when we come back, I want to follow up on that story and what the next phase of things that happen in terms of what was going on. We'll be right back.
Every story has a hidden element that is not often shared. Hidden Stories, Healed Now, with host Vicki Wright Hamilton, seeks to share the hidden gems in real-life experiences. Our guests are ordinary people sharing their stories of overcoming insurmountable odds while providing hope and inspiration.
Welcome back to Hidden Stories Healed Now. And we're talking about tragedy, we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about impacts to our community as a whole. And I think you'll begin to see more of that. So Darlene, continue. Your husband was a very strong man.
Yeah, very strong in his presence. And, he just knew that a child, especially a young teenager, young black male child that is in our family, never would ever think that something would happen between family members. He admired David. Mustafa admired his uncle and was very respectful of him as well. But when I remember getting a call from my mom, and she said, she's crying. And she said, Darlene, Mustafa is stabbing David. What? what? And so Austin and Paige, my two small children, and now they're about 6 and 7. And so I'm floored. I'm like, what are you talking about? So she says, Mustafa is stabbing David. And I said, did you call the police? And so she says, yes, I've called the police. But she said, I tried to get him off of him. And I said, so the detective gets on the phone. And I said, is he alive? And he said, yes, I think so. But Mustafa had stabbed him 77 times. At the time, I didn't know that. So I'm rushed, get the kids ready. I'm just in frantic. But my personality is I always stay calm. Even though I heard it, I didn't really hear it because I'm like, this is my nephew. And so I rushed to get over to my mom's house. She lived in Fayetteville. So I get over to her house, and there's just tape all around her house. The police are there, the ambulance are there, the fire department is there. And I remember when I pulled into the street in Fayetteville, nothing really bad ever happens in Fayetteville. So I'm like, what is going on? And Paige, she loved her daddy. So she's in the car. She's in the car and she's looking out the window. She's saying, Mom, is Daddy gonna be okay? And I said, yes, he's gonna be fine, baby. So they bring him out on a stretcher. And I go to walk up to him, and the police said, Miss Quincy, move back. You need to move away from him. He's looking down. And I just remember saying to him, what were you thinking? What are you doing? And so then I asked the detective, where's David? Because I'm waiting for him to come out. And they said they've already taken him to the hospital. So I'm still thinking nothing is, not my husband. I just saw him that morning. And so we go to the hospital, and I get there, and they've got us in this holding room. And I'm like, okay, so where's David? I'm here to see David Quincy. He was brought into the hospital. And so they're like, ma'am, you need to go into the waiting room. And so I go into this waiting room, and my mom is with me, and my girlfriend's husband showed up because he lived in Fayetteville as well, and my kids, the 2 kids. So then the doctor comes out, and she says, what happened? So I'm telling her at a high level, I'm just having a conversation. I'm just like, so my nephew comes and lives with us, and and this incident happened, and this is all I know based on what my mom said. And so then she says, I'm gonna need you to sit down. I said, wait a minute. I said, what do I need to sit down for? She said, your husband didn't make it. And I said, no. Let me go on the back and see David. I said, I know he's fine. She said, ma'am, he didn't make it. So I immediately left the doctor and went in the room, and my mom is sitting there, because you have to know she's feeling the blame, because I'm the one that said, don't bring him to Atlanta, because you cannot manage him on your own. Because David actually went over there to let him know he was going to come live with us. There's something about, now that I think about it, he was coming to live with us. I believe God shielded part of the rest of the family from all of us being killed. Mm-hmm. David had to be the savior to save our lives. Mm-hmm. And so I go into the back of the room and I tell my mom he didn't make it. And she screams because she feels horrible because I said he does not need to come live here. And my kids, how do you look at a 6 and a 7-year-old and tell them, and hasn't even processed in their mind that they don't even know what death is. Mm-hmm. And so how do you process that? But And I can remember, now going to, trying to plan a homegoing and service for a 43-year-old and healthy man. And, he's very popular, well known in his business, high school teacher, and never was sick a day in his life. And now I've got my nephew, who's killed his uncle. My sister's son is involved, and my niece his sister is an attorney. She just graduated from law school, and now she's got the weight of her brother being a murderer. And I'm like, murderer? That doesn't happen in my family. But what I realize is that mental health, it's taking our kids, and we don't recognize the signs when it exists. We try to ignore it, and we ignored it for years. And now at the loss of a man that had the rest of his life going for him. It's been a horrible experience, but out of the pain, God really has allowed me to have another level of passion. You can't stay. I remember when I got the news and I had come back home from the hospital. I remember crawling on the floor, just livid, just screaming, just on the floor. And then at some moment, I realized I can't stay here. I got to get up because I got kids. Yes, I'm still grieving, but I was grieving. Staying on the floor didn't have any place for me. There was no resolution on the floor. But so many people stay down there and not find a place of, where do I go next? You're just grieving.
We're going to take a station break, and you're coming up to a point that is extremely important. How do we rise above? So where's the hope?
Yeah.
How do you move forward, especially when it was your family that took your husband? And how do we reconcile that so that we can continue as a family and make it happen? We're going to take a station break, and we'll be right back.
Every story has a hidden element that is not often shared. Hidden Stories, Healed Now, with host Vicki Wright Hamilton, seeks to share the hidden gems in real-life experiences. Our guests are ordinary people sharing their stories of overcoming insurmountable odds while providing hope and inspiration.
Welcome back to our episode of Hidden Stories Healed Now with Darlene Quincy. As you see, this is a very touching and emotional story, but the things that come from it are all around mental health. And it's so important for us to understand and to recognize it and to move. And I think that her story allows you the ability to just see how important it is. So, Darlene, I just, my heart goes out for you. Like I said, I'll never forget the day of as we were working together. And David was such a wonderful man. And you have to know that his spirit is still living with us each and every day. So to help our audience, how do you rise up? You talked about some people stay on the floor. How do I rise?
The other point I want to make before I get to that is I lead praise and worship at one of the largest churches in Atlanta. And so sometimes we think that bad things don't happen to good people. We think because we're saved. We think because we're the corporate CEO. We think because we make a six-figure salary. Or we think because, I've got kids that are in college and I'm this and I'm that. Death and life is called life. And nobody's exempt from it. How do you rise above that? You have to, the Bible says to call those things that be not as though they were. So I began to speak life into my situation. I began to use, in the church we call them confessions. So just thinking, how do I get better with life? David had a business, and he has a business, and it's called Legal Shield. And my background is in IT. You and I worked together for years in IT, and network marketing was not something I ever considered doing. But because I'd always been a member where I knew I needed my will immediately, that was the very first thing I said I needed to have done. And as I began to think more about other people, not just like me, but other people that are in our community who don't have access to attorneys, I said, you know what? Let me go back and listen to what he did for, and of course I'm living in the house, but he was a high school math teacher. I was thinking that we all go to school, we get good jobs, and we just get our master's and you get your doctorate, and that's just what you do. You don't work for yourself. You know, you got to get paid by the corporation. And so, but then somebody said, Darlene, I want to show you what your husband did, because what he did was to help change people's lives. He helped give them a better way. And I said, okay, show me what he did. So I began to tap into this ministry now called Help. And not everybody, you know, it just was not something that I ever thought about doing. In fact, I lived with this man for 14 years. And when he would talk about this service, because we do things sometimes for the money, and it's not just the money. When you can get in the business of helping people, then your whole life begins to change. So it no longer was about making the dime, but changing somebody's life, changing my own. And so as I began to hear how this benefit not only changed my life, I said, you know what? If this is happening to me, then I know it's happening to somebody else. So I began to share with people this benefit. And then I realized, wow, there's a season for everything. And as I began to share, then I began to heal, because I was able to start telling my story. I started telling the story. So out of the pain, out of the tears, and every time I would talk about it. So David had a lot of school accounts that he would go in and speak at the schools, because he was a high school math teacher. He knew their language. And so as I began to share the story, I would go back to his schools and I would say, my name is Darlene Quincy. You guys probably don't know who I am. The last name probably hasn't resonated, but my husband used to service your school, and his name was David Quincy. And about 5 months ago or five years ago, he passed away. He was killed. And I no longer had to cry telling the story. I cried the first few months of telling the story, but then I could heal and I could tell the story and almost invoke the person to make a decision to say, you know what? I need that. And it became a ministry to say, you know what? If this is not only just happening to me, I've got to find something to take my mind. See, your mind begins to start telling you how you should feel. And if you don't open up your mouth and begin to speak, calling those things that be not as though they were, telling yourself that I'm beautiful, telling yourself that, you know what, this is not going to keep me on the ground. You know, I believe that I'm called for a different purpose in life. I'm supposed to be in this place. I'm supposed to have greater than my greatest, better than my best. My kids are supposed to have a home, yes, with a father, but right now this is who they have. So I have to display more love to my kids. And so it's not always easy. You know, one of the things that happened with me is I had a program that my kids were involved in, and that was to help them kind of go through this process. But I'm telling you, if you don't start changing how you think about your circumstance, and it doesn't have to be death. It just happened to be death for me. But death is now where it is. I can't change the fact. I can't go to the graveyard and cry. And I did that. I sat at the grave and I wondered why God, me, why not you? If it meant for me to be the example, to show other people that it's okay to live again, it's okay to have passion about something else, then that's what I needed.
What a wonderful way to live your husband's legacy. Mm-hmm. That's just absolutely phenomenal. Let's see if we have a question or a comment from our audience.
Hi, I'm Courtney Cook, founder of Courtney Tierra. I'm an educator, motivational speaker, and author of Worthy, a book for kids of all ages. First, let me say my sincerest condolences to you. Your story is heartbreaking. And I would love to know, how are your kids now? They lost their father at such a young age. How are they?
Thank you for that question, Courtney. My kids, it was very hard. as I mentioned, my daughter is a daddy's girl. So neither of them understood. My son early on was diagnosed with ADHD. And so losing the father of, losing their father was just traumatic. I put them through a program. Some people may not know, there's a program called Kate's Club. And Kate's Club is designed for children that have lost either a parent or a sibling. And it's heartbreaking to see the number of children that have lost their parents. But Kate's Club is a great organization because it puts all these children together in a program so that they know it's not just them. And so it allows them to talk about where I would not be able to tap into what's happening with my kids. They have a different or unique experience where they bring all these kids together. We do, memory walks, and they get a chance to talk about their parents. We have a grieving camp, and they're not crying all the time, but it's a way for them just to connect with people that are just like them, from babies, from toddlers, on up to like age 17. It really is, it's a great program. It's heartbreaking to see that many children that are going through that loss, but I'm thankful that my kids have that program, Courtney, because had they not had that program, I would have, of course, had to put them through some type of therapy, which I did, but it was so much, I think, pain that it was hard for them to keep talking about it. So the program allowed them to be with people that were like them. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question. It's hard when you're dealing with children, people that don't, that don't understand. They just know daddy comes through the door, right? I'm looking for daddy. Right. And I, Darlene, want to commend you as these years have gone by, and your ministry and your belief and your faith and how you have continued to carry David's name forward. You've continued to help and to give. So I just, I pray for you all the time, the kids all the time. But I know your journey is just beginning. God has great things in store for you. So will you all please join me in thanking my guest, Darlene Quincy, for being here today. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Hidden Stories Healed Now. And as we say, for every secret and everything that is told is freedom that we gain. Let us begin to have freedom when it comes to mental health. And let us begin to understand and want to continue to contribute and help each other. When you see signs, when you think something's there, therapy is not a bad word. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode.